to a late week edition of the Garden Report. Late night, 9:15 Eastern as we get going here. And we are through 3 days of Celtics training camp plus a media day. And what a week it was, Sherrod. They're off tomorrow. They will do a walkthrough on Saturday. And then here we are already. Sunday, first preseason game versus the Hornets. We will finally get to see Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, head coach Joe Mazzulla and company. So that's probably the big news of the week as we look back on it. Of course, last week, just a week ago today, Ime Udoka officially suspended for 1 season. Joe Mazzulla named the interim head coach. And we got to talk to him for a couple of times this week and saw him in action, talking and interacting with the players. Got rousing endorsements early this week at Media Day. And it seems like these guys like him, have a great relationship with him. But the question on everybody's mind is, this guy has D2 head coaching experience, a couple years in the NBA as an assistant on the back of the bench, and now he's taking over the Boston Celtics with championship expectations. Is he ready? And what's been your what have you thought of his first week on the job?
Well, I think Joe is doing exactly what anyone should be doing in that position, and that is simply just opening himself up to the process. Joe is not coming in as if he's got all the answers, as if he knows exactly what he's going to do. He's going to take some lumps through this process. He's going to make mistakes, but he's going to have moments where he's going to look really smart and is going to do a lot of really good things. And I think the biggest challenge that he's going to have with himself, and I think fans are going to have is patience. As you pointed out, Bobby, this team, the way they're constructed, when they are fully intact, there are very few teams that you would feel comfortable and confident that are better than them. And even with Danilo Gallinari out for most of the season and Rob Williams might not be back until Thanksgiving at the earliest, they're still going to be a formidable team in the Eastern Conference. But Joe's biggest challenge, I think, is just figuring out how to make those split second, in the moment decisions and not be robotic like. Because I think one of the challenges for young coaches early on is they have a plan of how they want the game to go and they're looking for certain things. But when things don't quite happen on the floor how they think they're going to happen, do they have the ability to pivot quick enough and make the right decisions? Ime, again, you look at this last season in its totality, he had a great year. But you go back, you look at the first 30, 40 games, I mean, it was hit or miss. Some nights he looked great, looked like he knew what the hell he was doing. Other nights he looked kind of clueless. And at some point, he either figured out or stumbled upon certain things that worked, and he didn't let go of those things. And then they just took off. You're hoping that the learning curve for Joe is going to be quick, if not quicker than it was for Ime.
So you're big on the assistant dynamic, the coaching in the league. I kicked it around on Dome Theory with Soap on Deb, just how important coaching is at this point, because I think everybody's looking at Boston. They're saying, all right, they lost their coach. He was a coach of the year candidate. He brought them to the finals. This is a ginormous loss, and this team might take a step back because of it. And that was my first thought too. And like you said, a lot of the stuff you said about Joe's right. He's going to have to show that in-game fluidity, challenges, all the different things, lineups, rotations, difficult decisions, especially on a team that has a lot of guys. And we'll get to that rotation later. He lost Will Hardy. This team lost Ime Udoka. A lot of brain power right there, lost on the bench. Last year, as we know, Will was kind of that guy next to Ime who's scanning the floor and going through the film and making a lot of calls on those challenges and stuff. So they'll miss him. And then, you got your Ben Sullivan, you got Damon Stoudemire working with Smart. It's still a pretty strong bench. But they went out and requested to the Clippers to bring in Jay Larranaga again, of course, as an assistant under Brad Stevens for all those years. And Larranaga said no, it seems, within the past day here. So it seems like this team's looking for a top assistant, or at least another assistant on the bench under Mazzulla to kind of help ease his transition. And they kind of swung and missed on this first try here. Now, Frank Vogel's another name you hear. That's like a big name that you'd maybe even think like, all right, this guy's starting to look over Mazzulla's shoulder a little bit here. You bring in a guy like Vogel. And I know Bill Simmons was pushing for that on Twitter, but I find that dynamic interesting because this is, of course, Udoka's bench, right? All these assistants. Mazzulla's a Stevens guy. and then they were looking at bringing in another former Stevens guy as his top assistant. Like, there's a lot of weird moving and shaking on the bench right now, it looks like.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really, I think that's going to be both a blessing and a burden for Joe. To me, the benefit of that is that your assistants are going to be on high alert more so than before, because they know that this is their opportunity to really make their mark, make an impact, be a difference maker on that sideline, because you have it this. To me, you've just got kind of this open slate, a blank slate, if you will, in terms of that on the bench leadership. Joe Mazzulla, as you pointed out, Bobby, I mean, he wasn't even on the first row of
Yep.
assistant coaches last year. And it's kind of like, basically being like, that, the guy that's on maybe your third string quarterback, who's now your starting quarterback, just like that. And it remains to be seen if he's ready, but I think they do need a little bit more experience and savvy in there. But the challenge that they're trying, and I think the reason why they wanted Jay was because they could theoretically bring Jay in and it not necessarily put Joe in looking over his shoulder mode. Because if you're bringing a guy like Vogel, he should be looking over his shoulder because that guy won a championship.
And
So
Celtics fans are, things go wrong, it's gonna be Frank, Frank, Frank.
right, exactly, exactly. And if you're bringing a guy like Quinn Snyder, who I've known for a really long time, and I think is a hell of a coach, it's going to be the same. It'll actually be even worse because Quinn, again, is someone who's also trying to kind of reinvent himself a little bit if he were to go and be an assistant coach. So I think what ultimately is going to wind up happening is I think the Celtics are just going to roll with the guys they got, maybe bring in, a young on the rise assistant type, wouldn't mind seeing Evan Turner back in the fold.
Oh.
You know, and not necessarily Evan, but someone in that ilk, just a young.
That was the guy Brad brought in, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. But they're
So
gonna.
this is the weird thing about this year. So Brad last year he hires Ime. The whole staff's cleared out. This is Ime's staff now, and now of course Ime's gone for a year. Not clear if he's going to be back. Hard to imagine at this point, but we'll see. Uh, that coaching staff's in flux a little bit into the future here. Now, I like the idea of going to Joe as a holdover here. Great relationship with Tatum. They seem to really like him in terms of his savvy leadership pours, and I think we've seen all that this week. Like, I couldn't imagine a guy doing a better job just from a temperament standpoint, stepping into these pressers, talking about the situation. Like, he was in a really tough spot this week, and I thought he did a great job. We'll see how it plays out on the court here. But they're in flux. Like, is this a 1-year holdover? Is this the beginning of something new? Do these assistants like Joe and like working under him? Because this is not who they signed up to work under
Right,
here. Like, is
right.
this going to be a short-term fix? Or is this team suddenly, from a leadership perspective, remember 1 year ago, we're sitting here going, is Brad going to stay as GM? And is Ime going to work out? And all this different stuff. Seemed like they finally had that organizational stability. And now it's gone. Like, whether Joe does a good job or not this year, like, that coaching staff's going to be in flux for the near future here, I'd imagine, as guys say, all right, do I want to work under Joe? Do I want to go explore some other opportunities for myself?
Yeah, and the other thing that I'm a little bit concerned about, and again, it's not even that the Celtics have coaches or assistant coaches who uh, are selfish, but all of those guys want to be head coaches one day.
Yeah.
And now you're working under a guy who's sort of kind of, but not really the head coach. So when you have those moments where, one assistant may be thinking one thing, we should do this, and Joe's thinking we should do something different, how much of a pushback is there going to be against Joe when he's trying to do some things that maybe one or two of the other assistants don't want to do? Whereas
Mm-hmm.
when Ime was a head coach, if Ime wanted to do a certain thing, you did it because
Yep.
he was the head coach. There wasn't any type of second guessing or anything along those lines. But now when you're an interim head coach, it's just different. I mean, the love, and it's not even so much a personal thing. It's just you're in that role, but they know that you're in that role without the ability of being the guy. At this point, it's going to be really hard early on for Joe Mazzulla to really kind of have the kind of imprint as the head coach that he's going to want to have, because everyone and their mama knows that he's an interim head coach. And as long as that interim tag stays there, there's going to be the potential for some of those assistants and some of those players to not necessarily give him the kind of respect that they gave Ime.
Especially in the bad times, right? That's when we're gonna really
Yeah.
learn what he's made of. Because day one, everybody's thrilled, everybody's healthy, everything's awesome. Uh, week two, is there a little injury? Is there a losing streak in the first week of the season? Do they go on a longer losing streak there? Do the rotations not make a ton of sense? Remember, Ime was under fire, I think you said earlier in the show here,
Mm.
around that January time. You had a lot
Yeah.
of fans who were not satisfied with how he was doing. And he
Right.
showed good poise. He kind of stuck to his guns, made a few adjustments lineup wise. And I think there was a good athletic story about how he started to dig in on the guys a little bit more. Joe's thing through 1 week here has been keep things the same. Keep our defense, keep our offense. Our guys need this. Like, that's sort of been his message here, is that the players don't want him rocking the boat too much. And he probably doesn't see himself as positioned to do that. Like,
Mhm.
how is he going to come
Yeah.
in here and start shaking things up? And that's fine, right? Right? They made the finals. Everything they did last year worked. But when
Mhm.
something goes wrong and there needs to be a little bit of tinkering, you're right. Like, can everything move in the same direction here? And who's the leader on this team, really? Because that's another thing. He's leaning on these players, he says. Now, as we know, there's a bunch of different leaders on this roster. It's sort of leadership by committee.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that, to be candid, I think that's the strength of this team is their
You
leadership. And
think so?
when you look at Al Horford, you look at the strides that Tatum is making. You look at Jaylen Brown. You look at Malcolm Brogdon. I mean, those are four guys right there that you put them on any of the other teams in the NBA. They're either the leader or they're second or third. It's probably second in command, and that to have that many quality leaders is there's no question that's a benefit for them. But the thing that I worry about is that you've got all these great leaders on your roster, but what about the leadership of your coaching staff?
Hmm.
Because those are the ones that are supposed to put players in the best position to be successful. And if you don't have a clear pecking order of how that's going to play out, you run the risk of having problems. I mean, is it going to be a situation where Joe is going to want to want to tweak one thing on the fly, and Tatum's just going to, just going to do his own thing because he's done something different, and that different thing worked consistently, and Joe may be wanting him to try something new. I don't know how all that stuff's going to play out. Right now, everyone is going to say the right thing that, hey, Joe's our coach. We love Joe. He's our guy. But when things get dicey, when it gets, in the heat of battle where you don't have time to have those conversations and kind of, just work through some things, you just got to go, go, go. How are they going to respond to that? Are they going to lean on their own natural tendencies or are they going to listen to the coach? Because remember, early on, Ime pulled no punches when he talked about how there were some selfish tendencies on this team. Marcus Smart made that abundantly clear when he talked about early on that guys don't pass the ball. I'm wondering how are they going to avoid a repeat of those early season struggles? Because a lot of the concerns that everyone should have with this team are very similar to the concerns that they went into last season with. And this is a team that understands better than most you cannot afford to get off to a slow start if you have championship aspirations. Yeah, you often wonder how could that go? How might that Golden State series turn out if they had home court advantage instead of Golden State? Um,
Well, I find the playoffs interesting to look at because they had a great run. But at the same time, you saw the worst of the Celtics show up in pretty much all of their losses, even in some wins. There were stretches where things got scary, things got stagnant on the
mhm,
offensive end. Defensively, they weren't locked in at certain points in that Warriors series. So,
mhm,
one big thing about Ime is he sort of got used to the fact that, all right, we're going to stray from what makes us great every once in a while, and I'm going to have to
mhm.
reel us back in. And
Right.
he did that over and over and over again. That sort of became his job by the end of the year, calling them a-holes and whatever else in the huddle.
Mhm,
So those are things Joe's going to have to do. That's not going to change. This is kind of an inconsistent group in terms of how they stick to the game plan and the habits that Ime stressed last year. So we know they're capable of doing it for stretches.
mhm,
Joe's going to have to get in that habit of being on them again, again, again. And Malcolm said he's on Brown and Tatum in the practices, but at least in the media and listen, we love Ime in the media because he was going to give us the great quotes. He was going to slam these guys and he was going to be honest. That doesn't seem like Joe's style. And that
No,
might not be indicative of how he is in the room, but with him, everything's great. Everything's awesome. I even ran into him on the elevator on my way out of the building and I was like, oh man, Joe, crazy week, huh? And he goes, it was great. Like he's just got that optimistic, positive outlook, almost similar to Brad. And that's fine if that's just how he's going to handle the media. But in the room, we know he's going to have to, be reeling in this group and getting tough on these guys every once in a while.
no, I think you actually. I was thinking that as you were saying that he has a lot of Brad Stevens like qualities. And the thing that we learned about Brad was, yeah, he's this mild mannered, kind of, just real X's and O's coaching guy, but he's pretty damn intense when the games start. Brad's way more intense than we thought he was initially, and I think you kind of get that sense from Joe that Joe is kind of like, the, you know he has a temperament about him that doesn't necessarily reflect how he's feeling. Like he's kind of like still waters run deep.
Yep.
And Joe, there's a lot of you get the sense there's a lot of stuff going on inside and of him that doesn't necessarily make its way to the surface us for all to see. But the biggest thing for Joe, more than anything else, is he has to assert himself as the leader. He
Yep.
has to make it clear that he is running the show because players, even if it's a subconscious thing where they get the feeling or the sense that he's maybe not as in control as he should be, then they're going to do what young players tend to do, and that's whatever the hell they want to, and that straying away from the game plan. I think, and for Brad, the challenge that I think he's going to have is making sure he keeps enough distance between himself and Joe, but being there to give him the support that he needs. And I know Brad, that's something he's very big on. He wants to be that sounding board for Joe when and if Joe needs him. But I think Brad might have to be a little bit more forceful about that because I think Joe's just going to try to figure out everything on his own. I think that's kind of, he strikes me as that kind of coach that isn't necessarily going to say, hey, Brad, I need you to help. What do you think about this? I'm not sure he's that kind of coach. But I think Brad has to really have a lot of those, hey, Joe, how's it going? Do you want to talk about anything type conversations so that he knows that Brad is there because Joe's going to need help. And that's no knock or shade against Joe Mazzulla. It's just the reality of his situation. I mean, not only is he making that shift over to being the head coach, but he's doing it in one of the more tumultuous times this franchise has seen in a long, long time. And so for him, he's going to need Brad to help him get through this. He's going to need Stoudemire. He's going to need Miles. He's going to need Ben Sullivan. He's going to need Tony. He's going to need all of those assistant coaches and the front office to navigate the early days of his new position because that's the only shot this group has, in my opinion, of having a great season. He's got to be as good or better than we expect.
Well, you mentioned the turmoil this week, and I think that's the biggest reason they went with Joe. I'm sure they like Joe. I'm sure they know he's capable of this. But he's a guy these players know, they
Mhm.
probably trust, and they have good relationships with, and that couldn't have been said even for Brad necessarily, especially coming in over the top and entering this room and taking back over. We saw how this group was affected on Monday, and I'll give them a lot of credit. They've responded in a admirable way. Like,
Mhm.
it was doom and gloom on Monday. Guys were confused. They were questioning things. They were frustrated. And that was my biggest fear. It was like, all right, are these players going to be trusting of what the organization did here? Or is there going to be some player front office turmoil over the ousting of Ime? Because they clearly loved Ime. And you saw that on Monday. Through 3 days of practice, I didn't sense any of that. Like, it was like basketball started. These guys dove in. They showed their support of Joe, which was important. And I don't know if they've moved on, but I haven't heard any frustration or negativity or anything. And again, that's easy on week one.
Right.
But I feel like they've jumped back in and, it's been moving on to basketball. And that's going to be the easy part, I think, for Joe.
Right.
A lot of those frustrations and uncertainty and the locker room dynamics and all that. That's going to be the hard part for him. I think what people overstate a little bit is the X's and O's. Like they're going to do the same stuff as last year, and that stuff worked for the most part.
Yeah. I'm not so worried about that as I am just having a presence, having the position of being a respected leader of this team. And again, it's not about players not liking him or anything like that.
Yeah.
Just the opposite of that. It's just that he's going to have a different style of connecting with them than Ime had, and I don't know how quickly it's going to take the players to buy into that. And by buying into that doesn't mean that they're not wanting to do it. It has to become a habitual thing with them. It takes reps to listen to what Joe's saying and embrace that. I don't think Tatum and Brown, for example, are necessarily looking to just resist, but they figured out at some point last season, I'd say about halfway through the season, exactly what they needed to do in order to be effective. And it's going to take them some time in Joe's system to figure out what they need to do to be effective. Because there's going to be a lot of similarities, but Joe is going to try to put his imprint on what this team does in some way, shape, or form. And that, again, figuring out what that looks like, how that's going to play out. And then, there's the reality that he's going into the season without his most athletic big man,
Hmm.
without his best stretch big. And so he's going to have to play some lineups that he probably would not have wanted to throw out there so early in his tenure as the interim head coach. But he doesn't have a choice. Because ultimately you want to put your best five on the floor. And 40% of your best five or top six, if you will, two of your top six are not going to be in the mix early on. So,
Yeah, and there's Rob, 8 to 12 weeks, knee surgery. We saw him on media day. Injury is sort of a reoccurring injury. I had heard a small tear. They talked about bone removal and a cleanup and all that different kind of stuff. Seems like it relates directly back to that original surgery here, and we didn't get a lot of details on it, but this is double that initial prognosis from the early reports here, and he's going to be a major missing piece. Jayson Tatum actually talked about missing Rob at practice, and some of the other centers. Sherrod, I don't think you were there on day one. The curtains went up, and who was standing out there with the first team at
oh
center?
gosh.
Luke Cornett. Here's Jayson Tatum on some of the other centers on the roster who are going to be stepping into Rob's place.
Tough. Obviously, Rob is one of the best in the league at his position. So, we got to figure it out. Plug and replace. It's man up mentality and hold it down until you get back.
What are some of those new guys coming together? What have they kind of brought to the table? That's why even Grant.
We know Luke for a while. He's been here. Fee, extremely active, physical, lob threat. Grant, kind of short, but competes, big body. So, we know what Grant gonna give us every night.
He just can't help themselves in taking shots at Grant. I remember we were talking with Brogdon the other day, and he talked about when he was talking about Grant, he talks a lot. Everyone's got a shot to take at Grant, but to Tatum's point, it has to be done by committee, and I'm glad he pointed out Fiondu because Fiondu,
They
remember,
like him.
they should. He's a former first round pick, uh, good player. For whatever reason, things just didn't quite work out with him.
Well, he got drafted by the Clippers. They had no
Yeah,
minutes for him. Then
right.
where'd he stop? He had like a second stop. Oh, Cavaliers after that. And he had a few
Yeah.
good games, but it was a 10-day deal, and he just they lost him after that.
Yeah, and I still think he's a good player. Now, is he a starter? I don't think so, but definitely if you've got an 8-9 man rotation, I could absolutely see him being someone that can help you coming off the bench with his defensive ability and obviously shot blocking and I think he's a pretty good rim runner as well. So
He was
he's
incredible in summer league.
yeah, yeah. Well, in summer league, he reminded you why so many people were so high on him coming out of Florida State. Why he was a first round pick, and with him, it's consistency, which is the case with most young guys. Can you play can you be, as Brad Stevens would put it, can you be the best version of yourself consistently? And that has not been the case with him. So hopefully he's finally found a basketball home where he get an opportunity to play and an opportunity to be that consistent performer that he has to be in order to be an impact player.
Well, I got to talk to him a little bit yesterday, and that interview will be out on Celtics All Access tomorrow. And he's fitting right into the system here, and they're playing a little bit of drop with these bigs. Feels like they're sort of easing these guys into it. But he was thrilled to meet Al, and you sort of see the similarities a little bit between those two physical guys, a little undersized height wise, but they'll shoot the three, and they're good drop rim protectors. And I think he's going to learn a lot from being around Al. I'm thrilled they brought him in, and he's on that two-way deal, right? So I think he can only play him 45 days, and he'll probably be in Maine quite a bit. But they should go to him early and often. I think there's something there. The physicality, you heard Tatum mention that. Everybody was talking about how energetic he's been in these
Yeah.
practices. And listen, I think we thought some similar things about Bruno Fernando last year that didn't play out. The NBA is a different level, especially for some of these bigs. But that shot is going to be the real X factor, right? Because if he can shoot above 35% from three, that's going to get him on the floor. And that's sort of Cornette's thing too, right? The pick and
Yeah.
pop. So that's what they'll be looking for from those guys, I'm sure. Can they fit in within the offense, set good screens? I think that's been an early emphasis. And you have to defend if you're this group. And that's where Luke and Beyondu are going to have some questions.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and again, the upside of having a guy that can stretch the floor, is that you can create potential mismatches where he's got a little guy or a not so big guy on him, and he can just shoot right over top. But they have to become all around solid performers.
Yep.
Fiondu, I think, again, I think his defense is a little bit ahead of his offense. And but he's got a nice shot, but he's got to round that out a little bit and not make the mistake I think a lot of young bigs make, and that is lean on that shot way too much. I mean,
Yeah.
he needs to be a deep threat, but if he's taking like 3, 4, 5 threes a game, that's not
No, it's gonna be like
that's
Tice.
hurtful.
Tice
Yeah,
Tice would take a couple too many threes, and you'd be like, all right, this is not what
right,
we can do.
right.
Luke, let me get my 3 minutes of Luke here,
Oh
because I
gosh.
know, like, your eyes are gonna roll into the back of your head. The commenters are about to go nuts, and Lord knows when they saw him with the starters, everybody on Twitter, everybody online, just went nuts.
No, that was the reaction, Bobby.
All right, so
No.
7-2 shot blocker, good pick and roll defense, and maybe a pick and pop three and some high handoffs. And can he give you? Listen, I know you see a guy's a starter, and you're like, this guy's gonna have a huge role, huh? Can he just start the game solid, make a few plays, then rotate in your small lineup? Because that's what I think they're going for here. Remember last year, Ime wouldn't always put in the best guy you think would be like the first guy to step into the lineup. He wanted to keep that bench unit intact, keep the rotation. So I'm guessing they want to keep Brogdon, Grant, White, and maybe Hauser together on that bench unit. If you're just short rotation with Cornette to start the game, short rotation at a halftime, and then you get into some of your better lineups, and it gives you that solid defensive grounding to start the game, and it just helps stagger your minutes a little bit where you're just not, because he's going to have to play a little bit no matter what, right? If he's with the starters, you're probably getting a little bit more out of him than just throwing him in there with the second unit.
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to play him because of just not if all you were missing were Gallinari or Rob, then you don't necessarily need to put him out there. But with both of those guys out for significant stretches, you're going to have to play him. I mean, you
Yeah, I'm
don't have
talking with no Rob.
yeah, with no Rob. That's the killer. But man, I think a lot's just going to depend on how Fiondu does. I think
Yeah.
that's the guy that they would ideally like to be that backup center because he has the ability to give you something that's a little bit different than Rob. He doesn't shoot the ball as well as, let's say, an Al Horford, but he shoots the ball from outside better than Rob. So he's kind of almost like a bridge gap type player between Rob and Al Horford. But at the end of the day, man, they just need the young guys to just play. Do whatever the hell got you into the damn NBA. If you were
Eat
in
some minutes. Just give some solid minutes, right? Because you can't kill Al. That's the key here.
right.
Like, the solution to Rob's injury can't be, all right, Al, give us 38. That works in the playoffs, but you don't want to burn out Al by Christmas. And so that's
No.
where these guys are just going to have to eat some minutes. That's all there really is to it.
Yeah, yeah, and they'll get opportunities to do that. It's just a matter and that's another thing that Joe's got to figure out. How are you going to balance integrating some of those young guys in so that your veterans can get enough downtime so that come late in the season and the playoffs, they will be fresh. Al Horford was a different type of player in the postseason. I thought he was the Al Horford that you needed to have in order to win a title. I thought we saw that, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they were able to really regiment his minutes in a way where he wasn't getting overtaxed. And that's going to be the challenge with a guy like Al Horford and with some of their players who've got a little bit more mileage. How do you give them the necessary downtime without it decimating your team in the process?
Couple sponsors here, you know them well, but we'll tell you about them again. Calm. I think everybody's finally gotten to a calm place after the chaos of last week, the Rob injury, the Ime suspension. Sherrod was just getting calm the whole time. He
I,
was on.
that's why you didn't see me, because I was not as calm as I needed to be.
You
And I
needed.
didn't want you to see that. It just seemed like one gut punch after another with this
Yep.
team for about a week there. I mean, you got Rob, you got Ime, and it's and you've
It
got
all
all.
started Gallinari and then just went downhill from there.
Yeah, yeah, and
So,
we had, right, and on the A-List podcast we had talked to Danilo like maybe a week before the
yeah.
injury, and so we're just like, damn, and
And you're
uh
questioning now whether he'll ever play for this team, after an injury like that at his
it's a
age. And
legitimate question because
yeah.
none of us have a feel for how he's going to attack rehabilitation.
Well, I'll say
Whether he,
this. In his social media posts and everything, and they haven't ruled him out for the year, right? And that's not something they've done. It feels like he's going to put in every effort he can to play a game this year. Now, is that in the NBA Finals? Who knows? Like, it's going to take a long time for sure. But if this is the last hurrah for him and he wants to get on the court and he wants to make that big push for his first ring,
Mhm.
there's probably a way, and it probably doesn't have great long-term implications for him, right? But there's probably a way he can really attack this rehab, push hard, and try to get back as early as possible. Because a guy like Kawhi, he missed a year and then some. He's trying to extend his career, right?
Right.
Gallo's at the end. He's pushing for that first ring, and he just wants to get on the floor for this team. So I think there's a world where you might see him, but it's not going to be for a long time. Anyway, calm.com/garden. Go over there. You know by now it's sleep sounds, which is my thing, the rain, meditation. I hear they get some yoga exercises as well. I haven't done them, but that's another good thing some people like to do. Everything on here is just someone's thing, right? Like they have a little bit of something for everyone when it comes to calming down. I know Josue loves the calm of the week, or the calm of the day rather, midday. You can use it at night to help with your sleep, which is really the key to your mental health and reducing anxiety and all these different things. And then, of course, in the morning, you can do some of these guided meditations to help set your mind right for the day before you even do anything. All of that's available, as well as some bedtime stories with LeBron James reading them. For 40% off, a full library, all of it, 40% off. It's a great offer, calm.com/garden. And then, of course, our other sponsor as well here. Where are they? Athletic Greens. One scoop in your water every morning. You're getting 75 vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, probiotics, and, of course, important this time of year, vitamin D immune boost that keeps these colds, flu. I know flu's about to start firing up, and even just starting in the morning, it's about to be dark in the morning. You just need that little energetic boost. So you can get all these little things everywhere and have it add up price-wise, or you can get it in one scoop, throw it back every morning, and they're going to make it worth your while. You go to athleticgreens.com/garden, maybe try it out for a month. They get the cool bottle. They got the nice container to hold it in, and they're going to throw in a free 1-year supply of that vitamin D immune boosting and 5 free travel packs. Take them to work, take them on your weekend trip, whatever you got to do. And they're also the good people at CLNS Media. If you try either of these offers, you're going to get a phenomenal t-shirt. Sherrod, I can't wait to see you in one of those.
You and me are not together on that one. Phenomenal. I don't think I can go phenomenal. That feels like I'm channeling my inner Bobby Manning, and I don't think the world really wants to see that.
We're gonna have to come up with a Sherrod shirt. I gotta think of some of your great Garden Report. What do you like to say? A shot of something? A shot of. I'm trying to think of your phrase. Of whatever. We'll figure it out. We'll figure out a Sherrod shirt. But we're starting with phenomenal. You can get that for free if you email a receipt to John_Zanis with showing that you support either of our sponsors at Com or Athletic Greens. What else is on your mind at camp this week? You were there on Wednesday. Brown talk that day. We've heard from Tatum at this point. Grant, Al. What's your big preseason camp storyline that you're looking into?
I mean, we can't. I mean, we've already talked about it. It's just the Joe Mazzulla effect. But behind that, I want Jaylen Brown to. He's to me is just a tremendously talented wild card. That again, he comes back every year better than he was a year before, and having that as part of his DNA, sprinkle in the fact that lots of trade rumors about him, and you wonder whether he's going to come back with the kind of edge that we haven't seen before. He plays with a certain type of edge, but I think a lot of those rumors and just his body developing the way it has, and him consistently getting better from one year to the next, we could be looking at another all-star version of Jaylen Brown this season. And he was all-star a couple years ago, but I think he might be even more solidifying himself in that conversation with his play this year. Because when he made it a couple years ago, he was probably one of the last guys that kind of got in. But I think this year Jaylen is going to assert himself as one of the best in the Eastern Conference at his position, and he will, I think, be an all-star again this year.
Well, I'll say what's encouraging about these two in particular is they learned to play together last year. You started to see a little bit of that, them screening for each other, them passing together. Those numbers only grew as the year went on. That was just a baseline, right? Because we didn't see them do any of that for years prior, and they didn't have the opportunities to have the ball in their hands. So this is the first full season where they're going to be empowered, tons of ball time. They learned how to play with the ball in their hands. Turnovers certainly need to go down, and I'll say this about Jaylen. Just watching him dribble around at practice, it's still a little loose, that handle, and that's always probably going to be the weak spot in his game that it just plagues him a little bit. Not everybody's a perfect player. Everybody has that weak spot. But I will say, and they've talked about this, especially through the trade rumors last year, and can these guys play together and all that. Going through that, I believe it was Jaylen who said this, made them a little closer. Had made them start to have those conversations that they didn't have otherwise, or they just sort of rolled their eyes at. And seeing them going one-on-one the other day, the way they were, and I can try to pull up the clip here, but it's up on our Celtics All Access channel, the highlights of that. There just seems to be a little bit more of a jive between those two, and a camaraderie. And listen, they've acknowledged, like, they're not the same guys off the court. They don't do the same things. They're not always hanging out, best of friends. And, not every star duo in this league is. But you're just starting to see a little bit more interaction, a little bit more of the head nods, and just the connectivity between those two that we talked about. And will we playing it up a little bit? Who knows? Maybe they've always been closer than it appears. But I feel like last year they really figured out something when it came to connecting, both of them succeeding at the same time, which is, I think, important, and both just finding their roles. And, to your point about Brown, you give him credit in that he probably knows he can be something bigger and better in this league. But in the context of this team, it's important that Tatum has the ball. It's important that he's the first option. And Brown really learned how to play off that. And when we talk about the finals and everybody goes, oh, Brown had the best series in the finals, that was a product of Tatum getting a ton of pressure and Brown thriving off that, which is, I feel like, the biggest stride he made. He learned how to play off that pressure Tatum was getting.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of his own individual growth and evolution, and part of the team's in that regard. And again, when you're trying to do something that in is hard to do, which is win a championship, and let alone win a championship with an extremely young core leading the way. It's damn near impossible to do that. But the Celtics, they're looking more and more like they're built for the long haul than I think a lot of folks originally anticipated. So we'll see.
For sure. And I think a lot of those things we talk about, that connectivity, the defense, the systems they're trying to institute, that stuff's all done. And so there's a new coach in there, sure, and he's going to add his own wrinkles. But this preseason's almost easier than a year ago, right? Because we throw it back a year ago, you have all these guys who are trying to figure out the switching defense. They're having a ton of trouble.
Mhm.
You talked about the smart call out and that ball movement emphasis. That was a real struggle for this team. But these are all the same guys coming back, pretty much. Plus Brogdon, who should probably be pretty seamless in how he fits with this team. Um,
Mhm.
there's gonna be moments where they sway from some things, and that's where the coaching is gonna come into play. But they are just sort of hitting the ground running with a
Yeah.
lot of the stuff they did last year, and none of it should be too hard to translate. Like that, my point is it seems like they're in a really tough spot right now with all the things that changed and the Rob injury and all that. But in many ways, like they learned what they needed to do last year. And
Mhm.
Grant was talking about this on the first day of camp. Like everybody knows the playbook. Everybody's jumping right into it, full speed ahead. I feel like we can play a game and compete at a high level right now. Whereas if
Mhm.
we rewind to last year at this time, you had Schroeder saying like, "Oh, I've never switched like this before," and Richardson saying, "Yeah, it's pretty challenging for some guys." And like everybody's head was just spinning. It's a lot of the stuff Ime was trying to institute this time around. Like this should sort of just be second nature for a lot of these guys, the way
Mhm.
and style in which they're playing, and that lends itself to a hot start, which is really something they're going to have to do when we talk about rest and not having that late season urgency.
Yes. They there's so many different damn like variables that this team has to sort through and figure out between now and start of the season, and then continue with that throughout the season. And again, this is it's one of the more imperfect scenarios that this season is going to begin under. There's always optimism at the start of the season for every team, but with the Celtics, there seemed to be a greater sense of uncertainty, which is unusual to start the season. But when you look at the all the different aspects that they're kind of grappling with and trying to wrap their arms around, it makes a lot of sense that things are not going to necessarily be ideal for them to start the season. Uh, like I said, I'm looking forward to getting games going. I'm looking forward to seeing Joe Mazzulla make the adjustments on the fly. I'm looking forward to seeing him make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. That's the value of getting things wrong, is you know learning from it so that you don't get it wrong again. It's there's just a lot of things about this team that give. Uh, there's just a lot going on with this team when they step on the floor. Uh, yeah.
There is, yeah, and the one we haven't hit on yet is that backcourt, and if Ime didn't get suspended and Rob wasn't hurt and all these different other storylines we've kicked around here, I think this would be the big one of camp. What's going
Mhm.
on in that backcourt? Where's everyone gonna play? What's everyone's role back there? And our big question when they got Brogdon was how is this gonna shake out? Like, is Brogdon gonna take over as the starter here for Smart? Is Smart going to maintain that spot? How's Brogdon going to handle that? He hasn't been a bench player, I think, since 2017-18. And his amicable nature and willing to sacrifice has really made things easier during a tough time for Joe Mazzulla, I feel like. So it feels like he is fully embracing a bench role, six man on this roster. He's
Mhm.
talking day one that, oh, people are trying to build up this thing between me and Smart, but there's really nothing there. And Smart's been pretty complimentary of him, too. And I think he made a good point in that they're both going to be out there in crunch time more often than not. They're both going to play over 30 minutes a game. And that's true. So they have strengths that complement each other. It's the other
Mhm.
guys in this backcourt that I think are in an interesting spot. Is Derek White about to play the Peyton Pritchard role from last year, like 14, 15 minutes, struggled to find playing time, and we
Looks
know
that way.
confidence is a big thing with him. Yeah, so how does that impact the way in which he plays? And certainly Peyton Pritchard, to mention him, I think has no minutes right now, which is tough after he had a nice finish to last year. But White, great defense, uh, good ball movement, but really, really struggled to shoot.
Right.
Those are the three guys right now they're looking at: Smart, Brogdon, White. That they're going to have to find some sort of rotation and roles on and off the ball that work for all three of those guys who have very different games.
Yeah. Yeah. And because of that, you know, um, it's just going to be it's just going to take time.
Yeah.
It's going to take time to figure out what makes the most sense for this particular group because and you hear this often. Just because you have the core back doesn't mean everything that you did previously is going to work again. They're going to have to tweak some things once they start getting into play because they'll realize that there's certain things that they can't do or there's certain things that they do better than they used to do. So what do we need to do to modify that and tweak that so that they're getting the most bang for their buck? So that's like I said, I'm ready to get started and just see what this team's all about, what they can do, and things of that nature.
And who's looking better? So this is what got me excited this week at camp. Well, the first thing was Luke, but we'll see how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
This could actually be super helpful for the team. And it's just shooting around at practice, but to me, Derek White's shot. Let's fly. Little better. Looks like he's made some tweaks. Looks like it's a little more fluid. Not so much fading away as he's done in the past. And he's out there working with Ben Sullivan and hitting a bunch of shots in these sessions. And that wasn't always a given with him last year.
No, far from it.
We'd see him in warm-ups piling up bricks. And so to see him out there looking confident, a little more fluid in his release, and that was the big thing for him. He's talked about it too, is he was sort of like leaning back a lot of the time when he was shooting. And I don't know what that stems from, but shoots 30% from three during the regular season, 31 in the playoffs, and he's wide open all the time. So if he can start to knock those down, the way he defends, he'll still be a real weapon for this team off the bench.
Yeah, and again, he kind of falls into that Swiss Army knife classification. Someone who can do a little bit of everything, but everything good, but nothing great. And his shooting, that's his weakness. I mean, it's a painful one because it's literally the one thing that if you could modify or get him to just get a little bit better, you're feeling great about him playing big minutes. But you know, it's great that we saw him knock down a couple shots in that video. But guess what? I've seen Ben Simmons knock down a couple of shots in videos. And how does that play out when the games matter? It doesn't. So,
and that's where it's nice to have Brogdon in there because he's going to shoot the ball well. And White seems to be happy with him being here and Smart too. So it's another thing that week one, it's all great, but that might end up being the toughest decisions Joe has to make. Or Smart's really struggling tonight. White's got it going. Brogdon's got it going. Can we sit Smart in the fourth quarter here and get away with it? Or Pritchard? Oh, we need a shooting boost. We're behind. He's getting hot. We take the lead. Does Smart have a minute in the fourth quarter there? We saw that in the finals, right, Sherrod? Smart sits that entire fourth quarter of game one. They find a little lineup wrinkle there that works. But it was really, really tough for Ime to sit down Smart the rest of that series and try that again, and they end up losing.
Yeah. I mean, there's this franchise is getting to the point where getting to the finals just isn't getting it done.
Yep.
They've earned the right to feel they belong based upon their personnel, based upon the success that they already enjoyed this past season, and so you can understand why they would feel that way. Totally can.
We kicked around Jay early in the week. I don't see a trade there that makes sense. Like, there's a lot of good guys on this roster. There's a lot of players in front of them. So I don't think that's a solution for this team, unless you do, Sherrod, Jay Crowder.
I love Jay.
I do too. He was great here, but
he'd be a great fit, but I don't believe he will be here for lots of reasons. But the biggest one is I just think that there will be other pretty good teams willing to pay him, more than the Celtics would be comfortable with. And for him, think about it. Where's he going to play? I mean,
Yeah.
how much
You're not
time is he
starting
going to
here.
get? Yeah.
Not starting on
So
this team.
right. So to me, it's it's just from a pure basketball team building standpoint. No, it's not. This is no,
We kicked
no.
around centers. Some people like some of these free agent options out there. Dwight, Whiteside, none of them. Blake, Aldrich. A lot of names, but what are they really at this point? So yeah, I'm out on Crowder. I'm out on a lot of those free agent centers. Let's see what this roster has. As you said, Sherrod, excited to see them finally on the floor. We will be back on Sunday with a live edition of this show. Post game, 1:00 tip off. Basketball is back. The post game edition of the Garden Report is back. The Celtics are back in TD Garden. Finally, felt like a long summer between KD and Ime and this and that and that and this. Now it's time for basketball. Celtics back on the floor. You'll be able to watch them. Hornets in town. I believe Raptors in on Wednesday, and then a couple of road games before the season gets started mid-October. We got you here on CLNS Media. Subscribe to the main channel. Pressers every practice. We'll be back there on Saturday. And then, of course, Celtics All Access for all your segments. A-List podcast. Sherrod Blakely. Any new stuff coming up there? Or episode already out this week?
Yeah, we just dropped one, I believe, yesterday. So we'll have some new content early next week after the first preseason game, obviously.
New Dome Theory out as well. Garden Report from earlier in the week. We talked with the full cast. Jimmy, Joe Sway were on. Some new segments up over on Alexa. So always something here on CLNS Media. Of course, writing up at clnsmedia.com. Joe Sway is now writing regularly at CLNS Media. So excited for that. So check it out. A little something everywhere going on here. Sherrod, the professor, working all day and night. Appreciate you taking a little time with us here tonight. And we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely, absolutely. Good seeing you, Bobby.